Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Mage, Errant, Book 3, A Traitor in Skyhold, Chapters 30, 31, 32, and 33. Out of the Labyrinth, Wreck the Halls, Confrontations, and the Council Broken. In these chapters, our friends head up in order to face the council and make an accusation. But things just don't quite go according to plan. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Dan for commissioning this episode. Dan is here in the chat. Hi, Dan. And hi, Emic Shard, who is also here in the chat. I'm not feeling super great today, so I'm sorry if I sound kind of snuffly. I will be taking sips of tea here and there. But I am going to try and edit the worst of that out. So, fingers crossed that's not terrible. These chapters are... I'll be honest, I have been kind of surprised at the way this book has been structured. I expected a big reveal, like what happens in this section of who the traitor actually is, to occur in the last few chapters. I'm glad it isn't happening that way because, personally, I am somebody who really wants to know about the fallout of a thing. And this is something that I always, I think I've talked a few times on this show about the Reddit channel. Is that what it's called? Reddit subthread, I guess. Am I the asshole? Which is a thread where people post about a situation to solicit an honest opinion from the people reading, whether or not they are acting like shitty, or maybe they're being gaslit into thinking they're being shitty. And what kills me about those a lot of the time is that there's no closure. A big thing happens, they tell you about it, you're like, you better go and fucking talk to this person and say this, this, and this, because that's fucked up. And it's a really intriguing problem with a person who feels like, like you're rooting for them because they have been made to believe they're wrong about something that is really unhealthy. So you get invested, and then they just don't really come back and tell you anything, or they give you just enough of a tidbit to get you reinvested after you've let go, but it isn't the detailed breakdown like the original story was. It's just a quick, we talked about it and he's agreed to do blank, blank, blank. And I feel like that at the end of a lot of books that have a sort of either a mystery, or there will be just an overall sort of personal confrontation that they're building toward, where I want a lot more of the discussion that happens after, and the people involved talking about the way they thought it would go, or the ways that they maybe were involved. And these books do that in a more they're more concerned with the perspective of some of the adults, because we've seen Alestin's POV. We even see Archer's POV, actually, now that I think about it. So I really appreciate that. And yet, because I am so used to the trope of it all kind of being dropped really close to the end, I am always surprised at how quickly it is revealed. And I say this with the acknowledgement that this may not be the climax. I think it is, but there may be a whole other thing that we're about to go through, so I may just be mistaking what I'm reading for the thing that isn't the thing, and that's fine. But regardless, we've still, even if it isn't the climax, I feel like we got on the climax train here. This all sounds very sexual, I'm so sorry, but we got on the train and we're definitely about to hit through the tunnel. Oh man, you guys, I don't feel great. Forgive me. I don't know why, but that one got to me. So anyway, all right, let's just get into this. Let me just stop belaboring this metaphor that's getting more and more out of my hands. So chapter 30 starts with all of our friends having recovered. They're trying to recover from the flash flood that Sabe manages to like kind of hook them into so that they get carried out of the area with the most imps. And it's a sort of, it's a really great escape, and it's like super handy that she's able to use this flash flood. But I really hated that when Talia gets up, she is missing a ton of her weapons. She says, "I'm missing my throwing daggers, half my hairpins, and a bunch of bone shards." And granted, Talia's usually got like 40, 50 weapons on her person. So probably losing these isn't going to break her the way that it would break someone else. But I just feel like I am a person who likes to know what I can depend on and have a plan. And when I pack everything in a way that's like very thought through, and then some bullshit happens that I have no control over and robs me of my security blanket, which in this case would be weapons, it is a difficult thing to adjust to. And I feel that in this as much as I do in real life. And Godric, she says something about how she's amazed he managed to hold on to that hammer. And he admits that he like kind of strained something in his shoulder trying to hold on to it. He did hold it, but it was not an easy task. So they go up to the second level. 2 students are dead. And a mage is lying on the ground surrounded by literal mounds of imps. And I'm assuming that mage lying on the ground is also dead, but it's not specifically said. And one of the mages who's in here who had been part of like, the team looking out for the kids says that she saw a demon, and she describes Bakori. And Hugh has to interrupt and be like, the book is telling me Bakori has already escaped the labyrinth. And I was like, this happened a lot faster than I was expecting. I really thought Bakori escaping the labyrinth was going to be something we worked up to over the course of a couple books. That, he would make multiple attempts, that he would eventually succeed, but that it would be a series of moments of our friends turning back the encroaching tide. And then, eventually a few books later, we would succumb to the inevitable and he would indeed escape this time. And now shit's gotten real. And the fact that he is already out, and also the fact that it's not a bigger witnessed event. Like, so there's no sort of, what's the word I want? Internal communication system in Skyhold that I am aware of, like akin to a loudspeaker. Right? We've got paper mages and they send their little messages and books that fly and all this stuff. Not really in the hallways, though. It feels like that's mostly relegated to the library specifically. And as far as I'm aware, we haven't had any like big announcements that have ricocheted through the hallways and gotten everybody's attention at the same time. And I may be wrong about that, or it might be something that exists. We just haven't seen it yet. What I keep thinking of course, in this scene is the Battle of Hogwarts. And the Battle of Hogwarts, there are a lot of like the bigger moments of people arriving, and the face-off and stuff. We have characters using that spell, Sonorous, to make it so that their voice is audible from a really great distance away, or even audible inside people's heads, which is super uncomfortable. And so there is a sense of like, yes, everybody is in different places doing different things, but we're all on basically the same page in terms of what is happening at the moment and where our attention should be focused. And this is a completely different situation, not only because of that lack of communication, but also Skyhold is just so much bigger than Hogwarts is meant to be. So much bigger. You know, it's essentially a city, almost a state of its own is kind of the way it's been talked about. And that is something I have a very hard time picturing. I just really struggle with breaking away from it's a school and understanding how much more than that it really is. And the fact that our friends haven't met almost anybody, honestly. It's not even like they've met most of their own class. They haven't. There are people participating in this thing at the same level as them who they are seeing for the very first time and being described as strangers, you know? So the fact that Bakori manages to break out and nobody is shouting off the rooftops about it. And he is just apparently gotten through, and Hugh wouldn't know if it weren't for the fact that Bakori was like, it was the labyrinth he was breaking out of, and the book can see within the labyrinth, that our friends wouldn't even necessarily know it had happened. I find that much more alarming. I was sort of hoping, I guess, expecting really, that they would have a tighter grip of the overall state of things, and seeing that he can like not only slip past them and get out, and the kids don't know, but the other mages don't know either. It makes me realize how easy it would be, how much simpler than I think it would be for Bakori to kind of do what the fuck he feels like without getting caught. So anyway, this mage who is like yelling at them that they can't do anything, they're about to like try and go out and deal with Bakori, and the mage is like, you guys are apprentices, are you fucking high? You're absolutely not going out there by yourself. And while somebody is like, well, that's the storm mage and they did some really badass stuff, and this mage is like, I don't give a shit. They're apprentices and I'm not letting them do this. And as much as I think I'm supposed to be like irritated with this person for hindering my friends, there was a bigger part of me that was like, thank you for, you know, treating them like they're children. In a way, it's reassuring to know that somebody out there is like, granted, they're much more capable than this person is giving them credit for. But sometimes it just feels like everybody just wants to act like these kids are grown-ass adults. And I don't really care for it. So the Bakori is heading toward the council chamber. And Sabe is like, I don't get it. Why would he be going there? And finally comes this conclusion about maybe this is why they need to be so powerful. And Hugh is like, oh, they're guarding something. I don't think that we quite get an answer in this section about what they're guarding. Correct me if I'm wrong. But this, I love this. Some student yells out, you're all going to stop him though, right? No, they're not going to stop him, the irate mage snapped. They're going to wait this out under this shield. Even a partial council is more than capable of taking on nearly any threat. And this is when Godric says, well, except one of them's a traitor. And he gets real mad as he's saying this. And Hugh's like, that's supposed to be secret though, right? And everybody is starting to get kind of worked up here. The students hearing this and everything. And this mage tries to like grab them with like ice, tendrils of ice, which Hugh manages to collapse the like crystalline structure of and turn them just back into water. And they just fucking bounce and they get out of there. So we have a series of scenes here of Godric fighting these like really tall imps. They're like 9 feet tall, described as 9 feet tall, but skinnier than Talia. And I really want you to stop and picture that. Because Talia's supposed to be, what, like 5 feet, maybe? And like 90 pounds? She's supposed to be real skinny. 9 feet of that kind of skinniness sounds crazy. And that must be really weird looking. So he is beating the shit out of them. And he's sort of noticing that the imps are getting harder to kill. And I love this. The next time his foot descended, the floor nearby rose up into a thin stalagmite, impaling a nearby imp. It happened again with his next step and again with the one after. And I just really liked this idea of him like stomping forward and each of the stomps causing a stalagmite to like slice up into an imp. The part that let the spell know what to target was tricky. It amounted to spellform construction each time he used it, but his dad had already done most of the footwork. Godric had only needed to memorize a series of rules for how to redesign the targeting lines. He'd already known his dad was brilliant, but he hadn't realized exactly how brilliant until he started seeing Hugh learn spellform construction. Archer's spell forms were designed to be easy to combine and easy to scale up and down, and they were incredibly reliable. Armor spells were hardly unknown, but his dad's armor was leagues ahead of anything else Godric had ever heard of. And I really love that. Like, it's just such an infrequent thing, I feel like, to hear about a parent being, like, competent at shit. And I'm glad we've got at least one parent in the mix who is, like, dependable and has his kids back and is good at what he does. And also, it's not for nothing, but, you know, there is such a trope of the big, like, beater, you know, the bruiser sort of sidekick type who maybe isn't that smart, but he knows how to crush things, so he's badass. And I really like the fact that Godric and his dad are both have full personalities and have some like characteristics that are not falling within that trope at all. Godric is really sensitive and he just seems like somebody who is more cautious than the rest of our friends. And usually, if you're like the juggernaut, caution is not something it's considered that you need to worry about. So authors will often just make those people kind of wrecking balls. But I love the fact that we're finding out that Archer as well, he has these depths of being able to do some really cool stuff with spell forms. Then we go into Wreck the Halls. Hugh sometimes forgot how enormous Skyhold was. And I was like, same. And most of the tunnels are abandoned and sealed off, some for magical experiments or things that had gone wrong. Skyhold's population numbered in the high tens of thousands, nearly as high as it had ever been. And I really like, you know, it's one thing for me to know that Skyhold is so much bigger than I thought, but I'm not sure we ever got a hard number on the population here. And that is really quite more than even I was thinking. But because of a long history of digging new tunnels whenever you needed a new classroom, let's see, unlike other universities, there was no need to wait for an older scholar to die or retire to get their office space. Just find a nearby empty office and claim it for your own. This led, of course, to all sorts of bizarre situations. There were countless stories of stubborn academics and researchers who claimed an office ahead of the crowded regions, then were left stranded through miles of empty tunnels when the crowds decided, through whatever mechanism crowd made any decision, to resettle an entire different section of Skyhold. Which, I really like that idea that somebody just gets very, like, but they get very fixated on one specific spot and then they are just out of it. Owen and I, when we were staying at our hotel in Florida right before we got married, and we were just spending the week with some friends, going to the parks and stuff, we asked for a room with a suite so that our friends could come and hang out in the living area. And we asked to be right by the pool. Explicitly said multiple times while making our reservation that we were going to have people in our room, and we wanted it to be an easy jaunt to just walk out to the pool. And then we got there, and we were placed in that exact sort of situation, which we thought was great. And we found it really weird when all of our friends were put in the other building, which was like almost a mile walk. And I'm not even like exaggerating really. And it turned out that the pool that they put us by was just going to be closed that whole week. So we like got what we asked for, except nobody had thought to like check that what we wanted was actually going to work. So we were like in this mostly empty wing of the hotel all by ourselves, and everybody from our wedding party was all together in this whole other area, just like enjoying themselves and being able to see each other really quickly and easily. It was so infuriating. So we wound up getting moved, but it was a massive pain in the balls because I had just like unpacked everything when we saw the sign that the pool was closed. So anyway, this just reminded me of that. And like when you are this far, when you're first of all real stubborn and you think you know what you want, a lot of people are going to be too prideful to like pull up stakes and be like, well, I guess I'll go with the rest of the crowd. You're going to do the fucking thing where you dig in. So I am just assuming that we've got lots of people in odd, weird, like areas that are completely alone and just don't really want to face the fact that they made a stupid decision and then stuck to it equally as stupidly. So, sprinting through the corridors and stairwells to its highest peak was giving him a new appreciation of its immensity. Trying not to worry about Ava and Talia for that matter. Because I forgot to mention, they have a chat about who is going to go and help Ava. And there is this moment where Talia is like, she winds up being the one that they select to go because she is going to be the most helpful to Ava, where they feel like, look, Hugh, we get why you want to go and help her. We do. But you are not the one you just don't have the kind of skills in the particular area you'd need to be if you were alone that would be helpful. And so Talia is heading out to rescue Ava, basically. And I really did appreciate Talia volunteering to do this because, you know, she doesn't really like Ava, but she cares that Hugh cares. And I don't doubt at all that she's going to do everything she can. Oh my God, I forgot about this part, you guys, though. This bummed me out. Godric, meanwhile, was rebuilding his armor from scratch. They'd run into a morbidly obese, large imp that had projectile vomited some sort of caustic bile all over his armor. I have talked about this and other stuff, but you guys, the fat villain who vomits as a weapon is such a fat-phobic trope, and I am so tired of it. It pops up a whole lot, like... It just a whole lot. I can name multiple video games where this is a thing and other stories I have read where this is a thing. And I just recently having The Whale win an Academy Award for Best Actor and reading the summaries of what happened because I have no interest in actually watching it. I'm feeling particularly fucking salty right now about our depictions of fatness in literature, media in general. So I am just going to mention that this comes up more than once, and you can't try and tell me that this is not linked to the fact that it's an obese. Like, that's 100% purposeful, and it's a thing that, you know, you're not going to get everything right. No writer is right all the time. So I am not going to try and hold this against him. but it is a very frustrating thing to have so much handled so well in these stories and then still come up against something like this where, you know, it's something that a librarian made a thread recently about how there is a lot more representation in media for children of people who are of different races, some folks who are like have different disabilities, and the thing that they fail to see represented are kids of different body types. And they say there's still so much fat phobia built into our stories, and so many books for children. The bullies and the villains are the ones who are fat. And there are a handful of characters they can think of who are fat and are not like, they're sidekicks and they're funny. And their fatness is still kind of a punchline. It's not a part of any main character feature really often. So I've just been feeling a bit of a way about that in general. And when we ran across this, I was just kind of disappointed because, you know, it's like, it just gets tiring. And I can't imagine somebody of a different race and what they must be feeling when they have to deal with stuff. So I'm not trying to say that this is the most unbearable weight to carry, but let me just say that I have a little bit more sympathy coming from a place now where I can see how relentless it feels to constantly have to have like the same conversation and be like, come on, man, you're great with so many other things. How did you do this? So let's see. Sabe says to Hugh that they are a third of the way there, but if we keep running into all these imps, it could take us hours to get to the top. Plus we keep missing shortcuts I know should be there. And Godric is asking why they haven't seen more people. And they don't really have a good answer for this. Sabe thinks they may have been driven away, but it doesn't really seem like that's what's going on. And then Hugh is having this weird... He gets a feeling from his book that is sort of hesitant. And then Sabe says we need to stop following Bakori. When we follow behind him, it just forces us to battle every swarm trail. And Hugh says, and where are we supposed to find a shortcut past him? And both Sabe and Godric give him looks, and Hugh feels like ashamed of himself because he really snapped at her. And then he's like, wait a minute. Because it feels pretty clear he is being influenced here. And I think that Sabe and Godric don't realize that's what's happening. I think that they give him odd looks because they're wondering why he's snapping, but I don't know that they like put two and two together. But Hugh himself is like, that felt like not me. And I love that he has this self-awareness so much. So he turns and walks exactly in the direction he doesn't want to go. And he is in a passage that both Godric and Sabe can't see. And I was like, this was what I had thought was happening here, was that he was being influenced by Bakori to go the wrong way. But it turns out that these are like other wards that have been laid. And the wards are influencing him to want to go in a different direction. And I don't know that the wards were put down by... These were put down by his teacher, if I'm not mistaken. But I definitely thought that this was Bakori influencing him again in the way that he had made Hugh take certain areas through the labyrinth the last time, you know? So we go to Talia for a little bit, and she is going to scoop up Ava. This is a really fun one. One cantrip that worked particularly well for Talia was designed to evaporate small amounts of liquid, spilled drinks, for instance. When Talia used it, the liquids tended to flash into steam on the spot, a trick that Talia fully intended to use in combat someday. For now, though, it was doing a great job of clearing her path of gallons of imp ichor. Her shoes weren't even getting wet. Talia delicately stepped over the bone-splinter-ridden corpse of a thorned imp, humming a jaunty marching song Clan Castus sang on their way to battle. And I just really enjoy her like, doing this jog through this, like, gory hellscape, and her shoes aren't even getting wet, and she's, like, humming a little song, and just... what a great image. She's just kind of having a good day. Like, it just feels like she's, like, owning this moment, you know? So she pumps mana into the dagger in midair, and it froze just a couple of feet from the charging imp, point angled forward and up. Talia frowned a little at that. She'd intended for it to angle straight forward, but it still worked well enough. The imp didn't even have time to slow down or dodge. It rammed straight forward against the dagger at full speed. Its thick chest plate actually splintered against the dagger. Its back chest plate didn't break, but actually partially tore off its back as the imp passed through the space where the dagger was hanging, completely immobile, which that had to hurt. And it stares at Talia for a second and then just collapses. And I was like, yeah, that feels like the way a lot of people sort of react to fights with Talia. They just get taken completely off guard by something. They stare at her and then down. And she's thinking to herself that she wishes there was an audience, because she is really, like, completely handling these imps no problem. So there we go to Hugh and Sabe heading down the hallways, and let's see, it wasn't a full path, but instead merely blocked off key hallways from notice. Whoever had drawn them appeared to be trying to mitigate the damage Bakori was doing in Skyhold without preventing him from reaching the council chamber. What was even more interesting was the fact that the wards were built to decay. Hugh would wager money that if he returned to look for them an hour from now, he wouldn't find a trace of them, or even of the chalk they'd been drawn in. Hugh grudgingly had to admit, to himself at least, that they were probably better than anything he could do yet. And I love how Hugh has gone from somebody who was like, I'm nothing special with wards, I can just, I can just do stuff, it's no big deal, to then, like, not wanting to admit that something is better than what he could do. Oh, look at you, Hugh, starting to change your tune about your own skill a little bit here, guy, and just saying. I get it. I'm not saying, like, he is lying about not wanting attention for being the storm ward. Like, no, that's very sincere. He doesn't really seem to like that kind of attention. But I feel like we're entering a new era of his abilities here. So we have some moments with, like, different types of mages who are fighting these imps, and one of them is like a weaver mage. We have one that's a shadow mage strangling them with shadows. And let's see, he'd seen a lot of mages clustering up and simply blasting fire, lightning, ice, or whatever else at imps. Nothing fancy, but for all the complaints Alustin had about the Skyhold curriculum, massed ranged attacks by groups of mages were both terrifying and effective. But then, Alustin had almost always worked alone, and the standard Skyhold combat style wasn't necessarily the best for that. And I appreciated that mention, and I also, it's not out of the question that Alustin has maybe just underestimated people a little bit. I think that mostly we can trust his judgment on things, but I'm sure he has his little blind spots and elitism and whatever. There'd been a light and stone mage riding a stone bull, filling a cafeteria with illusions of himself riding the bull as she trampled of herself riding the bull. Sorry, I'm reading this whole thing in the wrong. As she trampled imps. He'd spotted the angry journeyman girl from Edmondson Dree's class. His suspicions about her hair had been correct. She was a hair mage. Not only was she strangling imps with her hair, which had grown to a good 20 or 30 feet long, she was also using her hair to construct spellform glyphs, casting as many as a dozen spells at once. It had been more than a little impressive. it had grown even more impressive when Hugh led them on a quick detour to give his classmate copies of the wards he'd been using against the imps. Hair made for a pretty decent material to craft wards out of, it turned out. And I really like the idea of being a hair mage. I feel like maybe that's my jam. You know, I've been sort of trying to think what my affinity would be. Hair sounds right to me. I'm just saying. That feels... I feel like it's been a lifetime of getting used to this mane, this mop, and I already feel like I've earned an affinity. So yeah, let's go with that. And I like it because it's always on you. And apparently if it can grow like that, you don't need to necessarily keep it super long. It'll just grow the length you need it to for whatever you've got to do, I guess. But anyway, so I really do like, too, that Hugh thinks about how they've kind of grown reliant on Talia, and that he didn't realize until they didn't have her that she is not just the most effective of all of them, but that they do like depend on her in a way that maybe they should work on if she's not there. And I was like, I'm interested to see what that looks like, because she is puts so much of her identity into whether she can help her friends. And if they suggest that maybe they should practice when she, like, for the event that she is unable to help, I don't know. I just see her being really like resistant to that. And then we have Edmondson turn the corner, and this is fun. As the spell-crafting instructor stepped forward, his metallic shoes glimmering, the imps nearest to him began to vibrate harder and harder until they simply exploded. As Edmondson strode confidently but unhurried through the room, he was accompanied by a wave of ichor and bits of imp. Hugh couldn't help but notice that none of it landed on Edmondson. He quickly crafted a variant on a levitation cantrip and began channeling mana into it. As Edmondson approached them, the exploding ichor hit Hugh's levitation cantrip and was levitated not upward, but away from the three of them. And I do enjoy getting to see the use of these. I liked getting to see teachers in their element is really what it comes down to. And getting to see somebody who gave all of the students a hard time, but obviously can back that shit up by actually knowing his own shit. That is a favorite of mine. It taps right into my warm, soft, fuzzy spot for competent people, which I just treasure because it's such a small group. And yeah, I love this so much. So Sabe tells him we have to get to the council chamber. There's a traitor working alongside the demon. And Edmondson actually looks shocked here. And then is like, okay, I'm going to help. I'm not going to come with you. But I want you to know that maybe you want to keep that information to yourself. Like, just don't go blurting that out all over the place. He turned to go. With a casual wave of his arm, the small number of imps that were still standing exploded. I love that so much. And there's a moment here. Sabe says, why would the council chamber be warded against sound magic? Hugh says, there's no better affinity for ward breaking. A sound mage can shake most wards apart with little difficulty. It's also one of the most difficult affinities to ward against. I bet they have some wards that they really, really want to stay intact up there. And I love that. That is, sound is not an unusual thing for a superhero ability. But I always like it when there's like, for example, there's a TV show called Motherland Fort Salem. And I didn't finish it, but it was a really fun idea. The whole concept was, what if witches helped us win the Revolutionary War and were involved in the founding of the United States? And it was like basically a matriarchy instead, and run by witches in the military. And the magic in that show is almost entirely sound-based. They sing, which I've always been kind of a sucker for that concept because it feels right to me. And it's an ironic thing for somebody to say who hates watching people sing usually, but it's always felt to me like sounds really have such an effect on us, and we associate certain images with certain sounds automatically. And I just think it's a really compelling image. And in a world like this, I had kind of forgotten about that because I should have remembered about the ways in which the five senses are involved in things. And we have a scent mage going on with Godric. So a sound mage makes total sense. And the way that these like imps are just sort of vibrated apart, that's real scary. I find that really like intimidating. So 32 confrontations. And the entrance to the council chambers was in a broad circular chamber with a massive stone spiral staircase leading up to and through the roof. And normally this room is full of people behind desks, but today it's a complete battlefield and there are imps all over the fucking place. And Bakori is also on the battlefield. He wasn't making any move to attack, but then he didn't need to. Sabe had been watching the assault for about 10 minutes. She'd stuck herself to the ceiling where a minor hallway entered the circular hall at an odd angle. Bakori had shown up halfway through her scouting mission, and the battle had immediately turned against the mages. Ranged attack spells had started failing rapidly in Bakori's presence. The wind shields had collapsed quickly, and the wards around the staircase had likewise begun to visibly decay. And she's watching this and just kind of thinking about the fact that she has formless casting and maybe that'll help her, but she's not really sure. And I love as they're like sitting up there watching all of this, Godric says Talia would have absolutely loved this. So then we go to Talia, and she had gone to Ava's room, but Ava is not there. And so Talia is assuming she's gone to Hugh's room. And there are a bunch of imps trying to break his door down. So she's like, okay, yeah, that feels like that's a confirmation for me. So she looks at all of the different bones she's got as weapons, and she's deciding what she's going to use. Sun Maw bone. Now that was an interesting option, but she still wasn't entirely sure what situation that would be useful in. Next was a fang the size of her little finger. She wasn't entirely sure what the fang was from, but it was hollow, clearly meant to deliver massive amounts of venom. She'd plugged the hole near the tip of the fang, then capped the open top, forming a convenient little bone vial. A vial filled with a very carefully measured mix of powdered bone of several sorts, along with a healthy dollop of powdered magnesium. And I was like, a word? So she starts to charge it up, and she hurls it around the corner and closes her eyes and puts up a protective cantrip. And she hadn't had a ton of luck learning from the fire illusionist, but she had figured out one or two neat tricks. A spider web of purple-green dream fire burst into existence above the main group of imps. They were all staggering about, clutching bleeding eyes, so they didn't see it gently drifting down onto them. Talia didn't waste her time watching the mad burst of color, shapes, and bizarre dream figments erupting from the remnants of the imps, though she did have to shoo away several butterflies made of imp ichor as she hurled dream fire bolts at the imps that had survived the blast. And there's one at one point, and I don't know if it's here or if it was earlier, where she manages to turn one of the imp's arms into a drawing of an arm, so it's just flapping uselessly, and that really made me LOL. That was wild. And this is when Bakori shows up, and he does his Hello, little weapon. And he is doing the thing where he is trying to sow doubt about the intentions of her family, the intentions of her friends and her teachers, and whether anybody's going to ever have her back. And once you're no longer useful, once your edges have been dulled, you'll be cast aside like a broken dagger. And Talia starts making fun of him in the most delightful way. And is basically like, man, I know that I keep getting told life isn't like your little novels, but in some ways it is. And you having to monologue every time you come across one of your enemies, it is predictable AF to the point where it's like, I'm a little bit embarrassed for you. And Bakori is genuinely so taken aback, which I do really appreciate. And it's the kind of thing where I like the author sort of mentioning this, because it's not even like I'm reading Bakori's monologue and rolling my eyes to myself, which you would kind of think after all this time covering everything that I've covered, that I would begin to have that reaction a little bit more, like that I would get tired. But I think that's one of the things about tropes, is that you get so used to them that even if you are kind of bored of them, you don't notice because you have forgotten there are other options. Do you know what I mean? So it's like I'm reading Bakori's dialogue and I know exactly what it is that he's trying to do. And as much as my rational self is kind of like, oh boy, this again, my mind that's engaged with the story is completely willing to shut that voice up and go with it. And it isn't until she stops him and is like, man, are we doing this? That I kind of stop and go, oh, you mean we don't have to? And she's like, I really thought you would at least offer me something better. And he's like, well, I mean, you've got power. And you're not a warlock, so I can't team up with you. And Talia says, yeah, but it would have been polite. Oh. And when she says, you're sowing doubt, it shows like you don't know me very well. I'm pretty certain that would work on some people. But for me, that's really not the angle. And you're going to want to do something a lot more specific. And Bakori says, how about the fact that you're trying to rescue the girlfriend of the boy you... And Talia blasts an imp and cuts him off. And I was like, what's up there, Talia? Does she love Hugh? Does she? This is unexpected. I really I know it's been there, but it just hasn't felt like that much, you know? And I'm wondering about the fact, too, that she said something about how Ava only liked you once she realized he was a great mage. And Talia, I guess, maybe started liking him before his talent really became obvious, so she feels like her love is purer, maybe? I don't know. But I love when she comes in, it's me, Ava, I've come to rescue you. And Ava just wraps herself around Talia and hugging her and is super terrified. So let's see. Just in case, she'd also leave Ava the portable ward Hugh had given her for her birthday. The merchant girl would need it more than Talia. As she tried to convince Ava to leave Hugh's room, a whisper drifted into Talia's ear. A whisper from a very unexpected source. And I don't know what this is going to be. I don't feel like we get info on this. We go back to Hugh here. And he is saying that he hates this plan. And he thinks that a lot of this relies heavily on him, and we don't know what the plan is. But he is feeling a little bit resentful of the fact that it so often winds up depending on him. And he's like, I don't get it. Why do you always have to set it up like this? And Sabe says, because you're really versatile and we're here mostly to hit things, which is at least true of Talia. So, there's this little bit with like him thinking that Sabe had said go on 3, 1, 2, 3, go, but she meant 1, 2, 1, 2, go. Eventually, he uses this cantrip. The three of them fell upward onto the ceiling. Hugh was continually surprised at how useful the silence enchantment was. He could feel his spatial mana reservoir draining, so he clambered to his feet, trying to ignore the fact that the floor was above his head. And they walk into the circular hall. Because they're on the ceiling, not everybody notices them right away. And I love this. Several seconds of sprinting what felt like downhill, but was actually them running up the curving roof. Then farther down, or up, they ran, the more mana it took to keep them on the ceiling. It was also several seconds of trying not to stare at the writhing sea of imps that looked like they were about to fall on their heads. When the imps did notice them, however, that started happening. Or rather, the larger imps started hurling smaller imps at them, which that hadn't occurred to me as an option, but that's hysterical, honestly. I thought that was really funny. Quite a few reached the ceiling. Many dropped right back down, but a few clung to it and began crawling toward them. And as they're continuing on, Hugh is starting to run out of mana. And Bakori is starting to taunt Hugh. I thought you'd go after the girl. And at one point, Godric uses a silence enchantment on Bakori. And Bakori busts through it and is like, did you really think you could silence me? But then Sabe chimes in. She launched a blast of water from her flask right into his face. Not enough to knock it off the ceiling, but enough to make it splutter and shut up. Enough to know it was an insult, not an attack. Which, that's one of my favorite things. Like, sometimes it's just about the insult and it's fine. This is my thing in like little online arguments with reply guys. And they'll suddenly be like, oh, you're getting ad hominem, because you'll be like, yeah, but you're obviously a fucking moron. And it's like, no. See, the thing is, I'm not actually like debating you. I think you're stupid. And I need you to know that's what I think of you. This is an ad hominem because I'm not attempting to prove anything. That's just a straight up insult. That's all. It's just a regular old insult. There's nothing ad about it. So eventually, it does break and they have to fall. And it's like the lurching of it. Oh my God. It really made, you guys know how I am about falling. And the stone ahead of them, the stone started to shift and twist as Godric began lifting the arch, which made for a perfect time for a massively obese imp to projectile vomit caustic bile ahead of them. Sabe wind jumped straight up to the floor. Hugh could feel the strain on his mana increase as she did so. She slammed into the obese imp, detonating her wind armor and releasing a burst of wind to send dozens of imps hurling outward in a shock wave. One particularly heavy armored imp resisted the shock wave and tried to grab at Sabe. She twisted out of the way, spinning her wind armor back up. And they get through, and Godric has to collapse the arch behind them. And let's see. Hugh could hear shouting from the battle mages below. He wasn't sure if they were angry at them for going through the ward or happy they'd made it through, but waiting around to find out probably wasn't a good idea. And the last sight Hugh saw before ascending out of the circular hall was thousands of imps clinging upside down on the ceiling, staring at him hatefully. So then we go to the actual council area. And they hadn't been, reminder, Hugh and Godric hadn't been to the council chamber. So they're a little taken off guard at how spectacular it is, even though they've been warned, you know, that can only prepare you so much. And there's this bit where a lightning bolt comes at them. And I should have realized right here, Dinah, is that how you say? Dinah is probably aware why they're here, you know? And so this isn't a mistake. So Sabe, let's see, the three counselors followed her into the ring. Dinah demanded to know what the students thought they were doing here, but Sabe ignored them. Anders seated himself in his throne. Tariq quickly followed, seating herself on her massive undressed stone seat. Dinah glared at Sabe for a moment longer, looking like they wanted to yell more. And I don't know if I had noticed this, or not that I know that I didn't notice this before, but I don't remember it. Has Dinah been they, them pronouns this whole time? I completely missed that. And Sabe is like looking around and taking stock of everybody while Dinah and Rutless continue to argue. And she's sort of evaluating who in this room is the traitor. Now, she makes it seem like when she starts talking, she already knows who it is. But she's really kind of piecing things together in the moment. And let's see. Abila Suetas, a strong chance of her being the traitor. She was glaring at Sabe like she'd like to. He was still caught up in his silly argument with Dinah. And Yves Heliotrope, staunch opponent of Candaron, in charge of Skyhold docks, almost certainly not a traitor. And then Dinas Sol, notoriously paranoid and foul-tempered, Skyhold's internal head of security, was pretty conclusively not a traitor, but most people considered their appointment a serious mistake. Sabe couldn't say she disagreed. Dinah had lightning, venom, and gravity attunements. An odd combination, but one that had proven extremely effective in battle, which, yeah, it sounds like it would. So then Sabe says, isn't it strange that Jaskalsis would stir himself so suddenly? And she's talking about, you know, everybody being called away to deal with this monster. And of course, we have Rutless, who's trying to say that, like, Kayandas fucked up by going out there and leaving us vulnerable. Bad judgment, yada, yada, yada. And Sabe is like, no, Bakori set this up. She glanced over at Hugh and Godric. How, Yves said, Yves, I don't know if I'm saying her name right either. Could Bakori have possibly arranged that? Up until today, he's been trapped in the depths of the Labyrinth for centuries. It doesn't have to reach past Skyhold. He's a schemer and manipulator. And finally, there's a traitor not just in Skyhold, on this council. One of you has evidence that outs the traitor, and they haven't even realized it. Rutless, when we last spoke, you mentioned that Candaron had already broken quite a few rules for Hugh, didn't you? Why would Candaron violate rules she helped establish for some backwoods rube? Dinah demanded. And so Rutless outs the fact that Hugh has a warlock pact with Candaron, and then tries to say Candaron sidestepped the rules in order to get Hugh in, because he is asserting Hugh is like already pacted with her. And it's just like, it turns out, he says, I was waiting for the opportune moment, and Sabe is like, bullshit. You just didn't actually have any evidence. You had a bunch of circumstantial shit, and you had decided that Kandaron was guilty, and you were trying to find the evidence to back up your theory, and it was just not forthcoming, so you had to sit on this, and now you're unveiling it here, even though it's like this half-baked idea, which is absolutely not true, by the way. And you know who else wanted to pack with Hugh, and you didn't think the implications true in the slightest. Who on the council looks through new admissions first? Who's positioned perfectly to look out for prospective warlock candidates for Bakori? Abila chose that exact moment to release the magma she'd been brewing up beneath the surface of the council chamber, straight at Sabe. And I really do enjoy this, like, oh, the person who was really shitty and mean and just the most antagonistic, they are the traitor. We're just going to go with that. Why not? Sure. And we get to see into Sabe's thinking here. And Sabe, even though they had said Bakori's going to play on somebody who already is thinking in a certain direction, Sabe was like, I don't see it. Somebody who's already kind of willing to betray, that's a person who's already kind of floppy. And it's risky. He's going to pick somebody who doesn't have that tendency already. And then somebody in the position to, like, mess with his enrollment. And then it was convoluted enough that whoever was behind it had to be aware of Bakori's existence, not just being subconsciously manipulated, but actively working with him. And though Sabe wouldn't ever rely on Rutless's virtues, she would absolutely rely on his flaws, his greed, his pride, and most importantly, his hatred for non-humans. And that was definitely my thought as well, was like, if we're going to have somebody who's working knowingly with this thing, sure isn't going to be him. And Godric is thinking about how Sabe's plan went almost perfectly, which we find out later that there's the reason it doesn't is because they were planning on making sure that Abila was subdued before Bakori managed to break into the room. Tariq hadn't wanted to believe that Abila was the traitor, but she'd agreed the evidence with which Godric was presenting to her ahead of time was at least compelling enough to warrant being ready to defend the council from assault by Abila. And Tariq notices Abila brewing magma and is like, oh shit, okay. And the wards Hugh had constructed during Sabe's conversation had only held for moments. But those moments had been enough. Tariq and Godric threw their magic against Abila's, and Hugh threw his against the remaining minerals in the magma that hadn't melted yet. Which is a really interesting thought. It, like, that the way that he's able to target just minerals, I mean, that is just so specific, you know? She wasn't just pushing at the magma, she was building currents in it, transferring the heat to the stone around it in an effort to generate more, hurling lava bombs in high arcs at the others, and even shaping disruptive glyphs on the crust of the magma. She might have won if the other mages of the council hadn't stepped up. Sabe hadn't counted on them intervening, but it was a good thing they had. Anders sent a cloud of silk ribbons fluttering toward her. And of course, she burns most of those up, but some of them do get through. I'm not going to go beat by beat because I'm already over time here. Godric was happy to see their guess about the seal had been correct, though. The splatters of magma bounced off a dome rising up from the metal. Whatever was under there was well defended. What's under there, though? Water rose up in spouts from Rutless's pool and spun toward the magma. Godric would have sworn there wasn't enough water in the pool to make a difference, but as he approached, he could feel an impossible chill emanating from it. And it turns out, balanced with salt, and Rutless makes it so that the freezing point drops because of the salt. He doesn't have a salt water affinity. He has a salt and water affinity. And thus the water can be frigid and super cool the magma, and it doesn't evaporate immediately. which is a really neat idea. But Godric is like, because Retless is explaining this in the midst of the fight, and Godric's like, who stands there and just explains their shit? And I'm like, well, somebody very pompous, yes, but also somebody in a book who needs to explain to his reader what's happening. And then Godric is realizing that spell forms he's making are decaying super rapidly. And Bakori comes up the staircase and he has impaled Yves on his tail. And I was like, wow, that's brutal. That was just like, you know, that just, you don't even see the death. It's just like off screen. I felt that. That's rude. So yeah, that is the end of 33. So the next episode is going to be covering the last 3 chapters. We'll be wrapping this book up. So I'm pretty excited to see how this goes, because genuinely don't know. Like, normally I'd be like, oh, we'll just banish him back to the Labyrinth. And I'm like, I don't know that that's... It feels like the rest of the council left knowing that they were luring Bakori up. It feels like they want him up here. If so, it really sucks that some of their council members had to die. But I guess you gotta break a couple eggs, you know, like, we'll see. But all right, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you guys again for hanging out with me and tolerating my sneezing and tea sipping. Appreciate you a lot. And I will be seeing you on Thursday. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.